again, you lovely people. Welcome to the latest edition of the Opening Bell with me, Alex Steedman, and Matt Christie, as we roar into another fight week and plenty to reflect on from the last weekend as well. We've got a kind of Norfolk, Virginia theme going on this week, because we'll talk a little bit about Keyshawn Davies, a homecoming for him and his brothers, all fighting on the same night. And we dip into the history books as well, going back to 1990. Yes, just a few months after Iron Mike Tyson was proved not to be so iron-like. Yeah, a few months on from that, Sweet Pea, Pernell Whitaker, a Norfolk Virginian himself, in action against the great African, the great Ghanaian, Azumah Nelson, stepping up in weight, daring to be even greater. Pernell against Azumah. You know when you're getting your first name on the OP that you've made it, haven't you? That's coming up this week in history a bit later on. Plus all the news lines. Dave Allen's latest jaunt. Is it his final jaunt? Doesn't sound like it. Matt Christie, how are you?
I'm good, my friend. I'm good. Yeah, it was interesting-ish weekend of boxing, but a bit of an anticlimax after what we had the weekend before that, wasn't it? Particularly in the heavyweight division. It was the kind of fight I think a lot of people feared and suspected would happen when you match Dave Allen with Filip Hrgovic. Nice to see Dave Allen kind of get that moment in a stadium in his hometown. But ultimately, he was outclassed, wasn't he?
Totally and utterly. But you got to say, it's one thing being the better fighter. It's another thing really going after it to prove it. And you got to say that the way Hrgovic did that, mightily impressive. Right from the off, it was as if he said, I'm the better fighter. I'm not wasting time here. Foot on the gas right from the very start, pummeling Dave Allen with right hands and a heavy jab and a constant press right from the first bell.
Yeah, almost as if he's been told that as long as he doesn't get injured, he'll get paid handsomely to fight Moses Atoma next. And I think that was really a large part of the inspiration behind Hrgovic's performance. The Croatian is showing no fear regards fighting what many would call the most feared young heavyweight in the division. Hrgovic is here to make his cash and get out, I think. And the problem with Hrgovic, or one of Hrgovic's biggest disadvantages, is that tender skin that he seems to have around his eyes. If you look at his features, he does have big protruding eyebrows. And just like good old Henry Cooper used to suffer from, Hrgovic suffers with cuts around the eyes. He even got a little nick in this fight that we're calling completely one-sided and a mismatch. There was a tiny little nick there that he picked up. So if it had worsened, then he's not going to make an August date with Atoma. And even if it isn't Atoma, the plan, as we've highlighted on Opening Bell for several weeks now for Hrgovic, was to get back in the ring at some point in the summer in a big fight and then hopefully fight again by the end of the year. If he'd have taken his time, there's more chance of a wayward punch or a head or anything kind of connecting with that delicate tissue around his eyes and the eyes be opening up. But I think he got through without harming his chances of getting back in the ring in August.
And enhancing his reputation, in truth. Let's be frank about that, because we've seen not so much a banana skin, really, and I think it played out more or less as many people expected. It was pinned as David v. Goliath, and really not many people thought that Dave Allen had much of a chance, even allowing for the heavyweight punches idea. But you got to love the way that, refreshingly, the way that Hrgovic went about it. But Matt suggesting there was a practicality about that as much as anything else. Was there anything in the action in Hrgovic performance, positively or negatively, that had you reflecting on Moses Atoma and visualizing how that might play out should they meet?
Not really. I think Atoma will start as a favourite, quite understandably. But it was just, I think it was it was matchmaking so hazardous that I was just so relieved that Jamie Moore was there with the towel, and you almost sense that Jamie Moore was there with the towel very close to his hands as soon as the opening bell sounded. It was a merciful stoppage, and the moment it did all start to get too uncomfortable, it was stopped. It wasn't really a contest. I think the strange thing is that you do have this Dave Allen story, but he's gone essentially, and I know he had some kind of tune-up in the middle, but he essentially has gone from losing, although he had his odd moments against Arslanbek Makhmudov, he lost really conclusively over 12 rounds, and the marketing for that, Dave Allen is labelled Cinderella Man. We go into this, and it's Dave versus Goliath, and Hrgovic, by anybody's opinion, is significantly better opponent, more formidable opponent, more proven opponent than Makhmudov. So quite what they're doing with that, I don't know. But you can also see it from the marketer's point of view. The promoter's point of view, they need to keep Filip Hrgovic happy, get him paid well, low risk fight, so we can get him to fight who we want him to fight. And then you got Dave Allen, who has, in the last 12 or so months, 12 to 18 months, rejuvenated his reputation, rejuvenated his appeal at the box office. And you can stick it in a stadium. But for me, as I think you said when I started talking about this several weeks ago, out of all sports, this is the sport where we don't do this. We shouldn't be making fights like this. We all love it, don't we? I was writing a bit about this last week. We all love it when a non-league team or a League Two team draws Manchester United or Manchester City in the third round of the FA Cup. People got swept along with Eddie the Eagle Edwards, who I've mentioned before, in 1988 with his hapless campaign at the Winter Olympics. But let's stop doing this now. If Dave Allen is to continue, as he says he's going to, let's keep him at domestic level, maybe put him in a fight where he's going to win. But really, Allen is at the wrong end of his career. He's not the fighter he was. He's 34 years old. That was his 9th loss, and he's taken some serious stoppage along the way. So the people that are looking after Dave Allen, let's stop making stupid fights for him.
Yeah, and there seems to be a derailment in the theme and the idea from and listen, by the way, you've got to say, this might all be Dave Allen. This might be Dave Allen saying, give me this, give me that. You know, the opportunity to headline at home, decent crowd, hopefully decent payday. You know, that's a career highlight. And maybe they had to ride a wave to get that, understandably. But there's been a fork in the path. And we were told categorically by Dave Allen and by his team, you know, good people who we trust and respect, we were told by them a few fights back around the Johnny Fisher time that they were going to match him sensibly. They were going to look to the right opponents. They were going to think about sort of British level type affairs. And then suddenly he goes Makhmudov and then Hrgovic, bang, bang. I mean, hello, what happened there? Where was all that thought and care and attention? So I don't know what happened there, and I don't know who's been behind that, and I don't know the most significant voice. It might be Dave Allen, and if so, you've just got to say, sometimes you can only do so much for fighters. But this recent pathway seems completely at opposite to what the word was a few fights back. And let's hope he's not taking too much damage along the way, and he's got the bank filled up for 2 big fights. Because now, Matt, what Dave Allen was saying very sensibly and practically afterwards, it's exactly what he and his team were saying well over a year ago.
I mean, he even admitted in the aftermath, didn't he, that Richard Riakporhe might be a step too far for him. And as refreshing as the honesty is from Dave Allen, I think he was talking to Tris Dixon last week, and he said something like along the lines of, I'm dreading Saturday. I'll love it once I'm in there, but I'm dreading it. I'm fearful about it. It's completely at odds with what we normally hear from a fighter, isn't it? So on the one hand, you go, well, thank you. At last, someone's being honest here. But also, isn't that a massive concern that he's fearful going into these kind of fights? But frankly, as I said, if you'd have made Dave Allen versus British level fighter, it's not going to get the interest that a Filip Hrgovic has got. In the same way that his mission to topple Makhmudov, that wouldn't have got the interest if he'd have been fighting someone that people thought he could beat. So I do understand it, as you know, as you have to be honest, but at the same time, I do completely understand it. If your role is to sell tickets, your role is to make this fight as appealing as possible, then I can understand the selection of these fighters and pitch it as a mission impossible. But someone, as in Dave Allen, will get hurt if they do this again. It's only a matter of time before he gets badly hurt.
And maybe there's already miles on the clock. Yeah, we're looking at the bigger picture. We're thinking with a sort of a wider empathy, maybe too much sensitivity in truth, maybe not. And, you know, we've all got to accept the job of a prize fighter is to fight for cash and to get as much as you possibly can. The job of the promoter and the manager is to try and get the most money for the least hardship. It's just that balance of money versus hardship for Dave Allen in the last few fights has weighed very, very much in one direction. So someone's doing their job well in one part of it, and them are not doing it particularly well in another part of it. So that's fair to say. And we have to accept that that's part of all of their jobs, is to try and go and get the most money while they can and then get out as soon as they can. That's the whole premise of the game, really. Some are in it for glory. Some are in it for world titles. But really, it's about grabbing the cash as soon as you can. So hopefully he's got it. But it is a detour from what he and they were saying before. And it's slightly alarming, a detour, and a dangerous detour at that. But as you said, Matt, he did say, Dave Allen, you know, maybe we can win a British title, but it depends who's around. It depends who's around. So we're getting back to that practicality, sensibility that we were told previously. And let's hope they stick to that now down the stretch. Let's hope.
Let's hope they do. Yeah, I mean, there's no guarantee that. I mean, Dave Allen was at his trimmest since 2019, I think, and yeah, he trained as hard as Dave Allen trains, I believe, for this Filip Hrgovic fight. That's what everybody's saying. But then there's no guarantee that in his next fight he's not going to go back to the Dave Allen that turned up against Fraser Clark, who was just managed to last 6 rounds just purely because he could take a shot. So I think if Dave Allen is to continue in the sport, he's got to be taking it exceptionally seriously, regardless of who the opponent is.
I think between them, the corner and Steve Gray kind of got it right. I think it was difficult to see whether it was Steve Gray or whether it was the corner, really, in the final analysis. There was a moment in the third round, wasn't there, where Steve Gray looked across to the corner and almost pleaded with them. Did you see that, Matt?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Yeah, which kind of, and this is the thing, isn't it? If that is the thought process of the referee, and okay, Dave Allen had been down, but he wasn't necessarily taking what people would deem a horrible shellacking at that point. But if already he can start to see that, or he's already got it in his head that this is a mismatch, then that kind of tells you all about the matchmaking here for me.
And it kind of rolls on, of course, from Dubois Wardley, doesn't it, as well, to an extent. And, you know, I think Steve Gray is one of my favourite referees. I think he's a tremendous referee. It does link a little bit to the discussion we had post-Wardley Dubois, and that is who takes control of this. Because at the moment, and there's no inferred criticism of anyone in this instance from me, but it does, again, at least shine a little bit of a light on moments or periods, times or fights when they're drawing on each other, aren't they? These people in control, in positions of responsibility. The corner, the referee. They're kind of pushing and pulling towards and away from each other to try and manage fights. And while this didn't really reach any kind of dramatic conclusion, again, you can just see, can't you, the discussion. Who is it who grabs that by the scruff of the neck? They worked it out between them. I would just lean towards that was Steve Gray made the call, not the corner, personally, looking at the timing of it and the way it unfolded. But again, you can see it's a delicate balance, and maybe it's a delicate balance that needs to be shored up.
I mean, what I was thinking about, and is if you'd watch boxing for the first time the week before, and you'd watch Fabio Wardley versus Daniel Dubois, and you'd seen that fight go on and on and on and on, and then the week after you watched Filip Hrgovic versus Dave Allen, and it was stopped there and then. Now you're new to boxing, so you don't really understand what the kind of career Dave Allen has had. You don't understand what might have been going through the referee's mind before the fight even started in regard to Dave Allen's chances in that fight. But they were so wildly different in that the moment that Allen started to come under fire, the fight was stopped. Yet the week before, it went on for several rounds where a fighter was under fire. And for me, I think it does speak to that impossible to ignore perception that people within the fight will have of fighters beforehand. Steve Gray and the corner will have known that Dave Allen was out of his depth there. They will know that he's getting towards the end of his career. They will know that he's had numerous stoppage losses in the past. They will know that Filip Hrgovic is a far superior fighter, in the same way that people will know that Fabio Wardley has got a history of coming back from the brink, has got a history of taking shots and suddenly been able to land a Hail Mary. So it's peculiar that these two fights occurred within 7 days of each other, and the timing of the stoppages were wildly different.
Interesting. And one thing that struck me, actually, thinking again, sort of listening back to last week's pod, and then also having further time just to decompress and think about it. One thing that struck me now, Matt, out of the aftermath of Wardley Dubois, is that, and we talked about the dynamics of the corner, the referee, and the doctor in particular. That sort of triumvirate. We talked about the dynamics of that. Who takes responsibility? Should it just be in a medical situation, the doctor? Largely, should it just be in fight time, the referee's call? And I'm leaning towards that. As in other sports, the referee is just the guy or the person, the man or the woman these days, who just takes control of that. And I'm leaning towards that overall control. I think the dynamic and the movability, the fudgeability, the possibility of responsibility being declined or not accepted. I think that there's just too much of a grey area for me. And another thing that did strike me about the doctor's input is that I think there is too much of the doctor is purely there to inspect an injury or a wound, and is only making a call on the fight regarding the injury or the wound. And I think when you see a fight like Wardley Dubois, the wounds aren't just superficial, and the wounds aren't really what's at play in a dangerous, brutal fight like that. And I think if you have a situation, and this speaks to the board, it speaks to the doctors, it speaks to everyone, it speaks to boxing really. If you've got a doctor only coming in thinking about, he's got a cut, he's looking at Wardley's nose, prodding and pushing Wardley's nose, is this nose okay to continue? If you're only looking through that prism, then I don't think you're looking at a big enough picture in terms of what's at play there. So it's a slightly separate issue, but I think it's an important one for the board and everyone in boxing to think about. Because at the moment, I think the job that the doctors and the ringside medics, the job they're theoretically employed for, and it is for fighter safety, is the most important one. But I think the role that they end up taking on is one-dimensional, and I don't see it them being employed in the right way personally.
No, I agree. And I mean, I've been to numerous conventions, and one of my favourite parts of those conventions is going in and seeing how the doctors are being instructed, how they're being educated, how they're educating each other. And the WBA convention was different to the WBC convention. And the WBA convention, I remember it was around the time of the when Amanda Serrano got cut really, really badly, almost to the point like her eyelid is hanging down, and there was a whole presentation as to what you look for with that cut and everything else. But I completely agree with you. We know doctors. We know a few doctors that are really respected. And what they will do is they will look at the fight. They will look at the fighters, and they will look at the fight as a whole. They will look at the movement. They will look for worrying signs. They will look at their legs. They will see how they will remember that the punch landed and it had an effect, and then they will be keeping a very, very close eye to see if anything else occurs. So the doctors at all times, and I'm not saying they're not, and I'm not saying the doctor Fabio Wardley wasn't doing this, but for me, given everything that we saw in that fight, and we're going back to the Daniel Dubois Fabio Wardley fight here, given everything that they saw there, one might be surprised that someone that is a doctor who is there to look after the fighter, to pull the fighter out in times of distress, that doctor allowed that fight to continue twice.
Yeah, and this is a general point. It's just on further thought and reflection. It's a general point. I'm not necessarily digging them out individually on that night. It's a general point. I think something that it really did strike me coming out of that is that actually how the inspecting doctor in particular, but generally the medical staff on site, how they are employed and how they themselves view the role that they have on the night and the way they should affect and decision make. I think that's quite an important discussion, and I think it is one that might need to be fine-tuned going forward out of the aftermath of Wardley Dubois. And interestingly, Matt, Fabio Wardley, this may just be a practicality and a necessity, a timing issue. Wardley has activated his rematch clause. So automatically people will think, oh, we've got Wardley Dubois too. But it might not be as straightforward as that.
Yeah, it was huge news that Fabio Wardley, mere days after that fight, brilliant, wonderful fight. And by the way, let's not downplay Wardley's part in that fight with everything I've just saying and kind of suggested he took a horrible beating for 12 rounds. That's not what I'm saying. Wardley most certainly had his moments. But in regards to a rematch clause, as my understanding of the situation is that the losing fighter, it's up to them to trigger their right for a rematch, and they have a certain amount of time in which to do that before the winner can move on. And yeah, it appeared that Fabio Wardley would have had a certain amount of time to decide that he wanted the rematch. He's triggered that rematch. That doesn't mean that negotiations immediately begin for when the date of that will be. Wardley has got a lot of recovering to do. He has. He just simply isn't right now going to come out and say, okay, the rematch is in September. And I think really, really important thing to remember here is that it's happened in the past where a fighter will trigger their right for a rematch and the rematch doesn't happen for whatever reason. One obvious one that fits perfectly to this story is Anthony Joshua did the same after losing to Daniel Dubois in September 2024. For a while, his wish was to get Dubois straight back in the ring. It didn't happen. Joshua had a change of heart. There is no guarantee here that Fabio Wardley, after a month or so, says, actually, I need to take a longer break out of the ring here. Okay, you move on. Maybe we can do the rematch in the future. And they come to an agreement like that, which again has also happened. So this doesn't mean that Dubois Wardley 2 is next for both of them.
Okay. Okay, so that's the heavyweight scene. Well done to Louis O'Doherty, who just punched and punched and punched and punched, and in the end was way too good for Ahmed Hatim, so he defended his British lightweight title. And who knows, he might have Michael Gomez Jr. in the other corner, because Gomez Jr. has looked turbocharged, Matt, since he's moved up to 135 pounds. Of course, he was pulled out on fight night, wasn't he, against Reece Bellotti. It's a super featherweight when they were supposed to fight first time around, and then he was sort of worn down and retired late on in a title fight against the same Reece Bellotti. But he's moved up to 135 pounds. He steamrolled Jordan Flynn, looking good, and he did exactly the same, just out punching and out powering and out everything, Lee McGregor. So any thought the McGregor might turn out to be the bet of the weekend if he could rekindle some of the old fire was absolutely misguided. You were right, Matt. Gomez looks a different animal entirely, doesn't he? Up at 135 pounds. Really impressed with him.
Yeah, I mean, he's like an uncaged animal, isn't he, when he gets in the ring, as we saw from him going over and kind of nudging the head back and then proceeding to unleash hell as soon as the opening bell sounded. McGregor had his moments. McGregor, for me, there were times where it looked like he might be able to kind of get behind his boxing and contain the fire within, but Gomez was just relentless. Clearly more suited to the weight class than McGregor. Seems to be punching hard and often, far harder and far more often than he used to. And one would think and hope that after some difficult, tricky things going on in the background, he's now completely focused on his boxing career. Tremendous performance from him. Really good fight. You kind of feel like the temptation would be to label it one-sided in Gomez's favour, but no, it was at times going both ways. It was the best fight of the night for me.
Oh, McGregor gave it everything, tried everything. He was in fifth gear though, right from the start, wasn't he? I mean, he probably won the first round just through sheer effort, and I mean, he absolutely went for it. Wicked body shots from McGregor. He tried absolutely everything, but he looked really fleshy, didn't he? Coming up from 126 pounds, he looked really fleshy, jumping up, and he was just busting a gasket just to try and stay on level terms with Gomez. And Gomez was happy to let him punch away. He was happy to take those shots. He could take them, and then when he burst into gear, he just looked like a different animal. He looked like a different weight entirely. So a little bit of the conversation that we had about Benavidez, I think, suddenly with Gomez, you think, where did this come from? Who is this guy? There's a small element of that, in truth, I think. If you're following boxing these days, I think you do wonder. But if you just say it's purely the weight, and his attitude's phenomenal. I mean, I think he's got to can it a little bit. You know, in the same way that fight fans roll their eyes and get a bit tiresome of the old sort of Tony Bellew versus Oval Mackenzie scenario years ago, where, you know, 1 minute he's going to decapitate him, eat his kids and all of that, and then the next minute he's, you know, boxing his way on the back foot to a points victory. I think boxing fans get a bit tiresome of that kind of stuff, promising one thing, delivering another. And obviously with Bellew, weight was at play and whatnot. But I think if Gomez is going to go running around like a lunatic all the time and then kiss and make up and hold everyone's hands at the end and say sorry, that's going to wear pretty thin pretty quickly. But caged animal is the right phrase, Matt. He's got some of his dad in him, hasn't he? And that's a fighter. It's a fighter's instinct. And if it's simply him let loose now fighting at his right way, then he's going to be a handful. And him versus Louis O'Doherty, yes, please, book me a ticket.
Oh, a terrific domestic dust-up that would be. But yeah, I mean, Gomez is Gomez. As you say, look at what his dad was like. Look at how his dad used to fight. And Gomez Jr., a bit of a cliche saying they're a born fighter, but I think it really fits here. And I think when you're kind of judging certain people's behaviour, the one person that you judge it against is your own. And just because we wouldn't be acting like that doesn't mean that necessarily he can help himself when he's in that mood for a fight. Even at the end, where McGregor had taken a sustained pounding, the towel had come in, not in a particularly good way. You've still got Gomez roaring at the top of his lungs, telling everyone to go F themselves. And eventually kind of all of a sudden thought, hang on a minute, he goes over, embraces with McGregor. I suppose my point is, it's all well and good, the likes of us sitting here saying, calm down a bit, mate, keep it calm. He obviously very, very clearly finds it difficult to contain himself when he is in fight mode. But if he can, then I'll be interested to see where he goes. I'll be interested to see if he can go beyond domestic level. But at the moment, he is at domestic level. He was against a once promising fighter who was stepping up in weight and didn't look like the weight suited him. So we could now say, with hindsight, he should have done that to him anyway. But yeah, really, really impressive. I wasn't expecting it to be quite like that.
Hearts fan Lee McGregor, bad weekend for the Jammed Hearts. My team, bad weekend. History repeating itself at the hands of Celtic. Oh dear. Yeah, that was pretty painful. So pretty painful weekend all round for Lee McGregor, in truth. But Michael Gomez Jr. Rolls on. It was a good weekend for Paddy Donovan. He's got back on track and probably booked himself a ticket for the winner of Crocker Paro, which is coming up, Matt, isn't it? Crocker Paro's 24th of June in Adelaide, just round the corner. And Paddy Donovan had an away victory against Karen Chukadzian. He had him down a couple of times. Second was a push, got called. Ref made a mistake, and it probably won the fight for Donovan on the cards.
It probably did. I mean, that wasn't an easy assignment at all for Paddy Donovan, to particularly after the heartbreak of what he went through in those two fights with Lewis Crocker. One of them where he was well on top and ended up getting thrown out, and then there's the other fight where it was close, but Crocker was well improved. Donovan went into that thinking all he had to do was turn up to win, and really his whole opinion of himself changed over the course of those two fights. So he had to really find something within. And I think the fact that he went out to Germany for that fight, and I know that's a consequence of who was staging it, but the fact that he went out to Germany for that fight and got the victory against a really good opponent bodes well for his future.
And largely looked good doing it. And I'm saying that knockdown sort of swayed the fight his way. Mathematically, it did.
Yes, I know what you're saying.
On the cards, you could argue he might have won it more comfortably than that anyway beforehand, but you give with one, take with others. But anyway, he got the vote there. And in Norfolk, Virginia, it was a homecoming for Keyshawn Davis. Slightly odd match that against Nahir Albright, really, for a guy at sort of Davis's stage in the game. It was a bit of a kind of homecoming gimme, wasn't it? And I don't think the fans turned out in the kind of sellout number that they had done previously. And maybe the matchup said something of it. But I think Top Rank are trying to do a kind of Terence Crawford, Omaha, Nebraska with Keyshawn Davis, and that has really build that home following for him.
Yeah, I mean, it was a rematch, wasn't it, this fight? I mean, the first fight was ruled a no contest after Davis had won it back in 2023. There'd been there's been a bit of needle in the background between Albright and the Davis family, so I think you could argue it was sellable in that regard. But yeah, they kind of I look and see what people are looking at online, what people are looking at on social media, what people are searching for on Google in regards boxing, and all over the weekend, more people are searching for Dave Allen than they are Keyshawn Davis. And this is a worldwide thing as well. This isn't just me sitting in Doncaster saying that. This is a worldwide thing. So there wasn't a great deal of interest around Keyshawn Davis, but he's such a promising talent, one of the best in the world. that hopefully we do get something a bit more marquee. But you're right to say that with Terence Crawford. It's almost like Terence Crawford was the best kept secret for about 8 years before the whole world got to understand what we were all so excited about. Whether that is the best plan, whether there is a Canelo Alvarez at the end of the rainbow for Keyshawn like there was for Crawford, who knows? It ended up working out. Ended up working out perfectly for Crawford in the end. And we can look back on his career and say, yes, that was perfectly managed from start to finish. Now we know how it finished. But with Keyshawn, I'd like to see his talents really being shouted at from the mountaintops because, I really rate him.
He's very good. He's very good. But he got clocked by right hand in the 5th round, just to remind you that he's human and they're all vulnerable. They're all vulnerable. So I think that was a nice little reminder for him, as much as for us as fans, just to check our enthusiasm that he's not some kind of ghost zapping, shape shifting wizard. You know, he is immortal after all. So that was at the weekend. Upcoming, about to start in Las Vegas, the Enhanced Games stateside, where athletes can pretty much take what they want. And I think the idea is that the sponsors will be able to sell their enhanced products to thousands, if not millions of people on the back of proving what these wonder drugs can do for athletes. So the Enhanced Games upcoming in Vegas soon. And on September 12th in Vegas, Conor Benn against Ryan Garcia.
That's what we're being led to believe. Nice segue there. Look at that. Wow. Ryan Garcia has announced it twice in the last few days. The first time it was on a live stream where he was alongside a rapper, and he said that he's fighting on September the 12th against Conor Benn, was how he described it. And then he was slightly more restrained on Monday night on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, when he sat there as a studio guest with his green WBC belt over his shoulder, dressed in a suit, and sat down and said, yes, it is definitely happening on September the 12th in Las Vegas. I am fighting Conor Benn. We know as fact that these negotiations have been ongoing. Keith Connolly last week said it looks like it's going to happen. Conor Benn's manager, Keith Connolly, said it looks like it's going to happen, but we're not quite there yet. Given Garcia has now gone out and said it twice, it would appear that is what's going to happen. I think we've spoke about this matchup before. It's kind of been bubbling under for quite a while now. Somehow, Conor Benn is still the number one contender in the welterweight division, even though he hasn't made 147 pounds since the beginning of 2022. That's more than 4 years ago when he last fought welterweight. Yet the WBC can justify this choice as Conor Benn as the leading contender at welterweight. We know what happened since 2022. Fight with Chris Eubank Jr. was called off because Conor Benn failed not one but two performance-enhancing drug tests, 5 weeks apart, for the same illegal substance, clomiphene, which ended up completely obliterating all of the good work that the marketeers had done to build that October 22 fight, and it was called off at the 11th hour. And then there was a long and winding battle with authorities regarding the results of those two tests that ultimately led to Benn being allowed to fight again. He's beat Eubank. He beat Eubank in the rematch after losing the first fight up at middleweight. He's had one fight since. Slightly underwhelming performance against a shot-worn Regis Prograis, which he won over 10 rounds, and he weighed just over 149.5 pounds for that, and that was just last month. And now he goes into this one. Ryan Garcia, well, he beat Devin Haney in a career-best performance, only to fail the post-fight test in 2025, was it? At the beginning of 2025, failed the test. Contest was made a no contest. He then had a ban for 12 months and came back and was presented with a world title shot. So yes, Garcia versus Benn. Whether we like it or not, whether we want to kind of, there's certainly some issues around this, kind of morality issues, you could say. But it's going to happen. It's going to be massive. It's going to be massive. This fight.
It'll be huge. Yeah, it'll be huge. It'll be huge. And it's not just morality issues, Matt. It's the position of the WBC in the sport. And you know how much Mauricio loves boxing and how much he loves boxers. You also know how much work he does behind the scenes genuinely to help out, to try to push the sport forward for the betterment of the fighters, maybe for the structure of the sport, and a lot of medical stuff he does behind the scenes as well. Obviously, the WBC were at the heart of the reduction in round number from 15 to 12 way back when under his father. So they've always had that as a strain in their philosophies. There's no doubt about it. And there's a lot of stuff they do behind the scenes that is unseen, unheard, and perhaps to an extent unknown. And, we try to mention that from time to time. But there's no doubt that Mauricio also has a blind spot for fighters. One of those failed tests of Conor Benn's was on the WBC clean program. And the WBC had an opportunity to push that, and they chose not to. The WBC chose to essentially reward Ryan Garcia after his year out of the game. In other words, it is on their watch, some of this. And, Benn and Garcia, they should have Mauricio as godfathers to their children, either now or the future, really, as a kind of thank you for what he's done for them, rightly or, more rightly, wrongly. It is on their watch to an extent, some of this, but it is where we are. And interestingly, on September 12th, there might be a kind of cross-world global boxing extravaganza because Christian Mbilli in Saudi is supposed to be on the same day.
Well, this is kind of what people are now talking about, is that Canelo and Mbilli via Turki Alalshikh kind of came out over the weekend and said, "Yep, this fight is on." Canelo called Mbilli a great fighter. Mbilli is predicting it to be, I think he said it's going to be the fight of the decade. It might well be a good scrap, actually. I've got no issue with this fight at all. But they're going to fight on September the 12th out in Saudi Arabia. Ryan Garcia now saying, and Ryan Garcia has had a relationship with Turki Alalshikh, as has Conor Benn. Alalshikh played a huge role in staging those two fights with Chris Eubank Jr. Eddie Hearn said prior to the first fight that this wouldn't be happening without Turki Alalshikh. So it seems unlikely that Garcia and Benn are going to go out of their way to upset the big bill in Saudi Arabia. One would think that they will complement each other, whether the timings of the main events will be staggered so that they almost kind of bleed into each other, and fight fans, and they've done this before, so fight fans have just got this kind of extravaganza of boxing over that weekend. And I don't know, I haven't spoken to anybody about this, but looking at it all unfold, that would appear to be what is happening here.
And so most likely it'll be a Zuffa event in association with, say, Riyadh season, in association with Golden Boy, maybe all of those things. So that is Canelo against Mbilli coming up on September the 12th. All of that in the future. There's a couple of news lines actually we'll carry on to next week. They are Eggington retires, Zurdo Ramirez carrying on, Loma return, ? Eubank a free agent. Those are all news lines we can carry on to next week in the podcast as we press on. And what we're going to do a special bonus pod preview as well, which is Usyk against Rico Verhoeven, Frank Sanchez against Richard Torres, up-and-coming heavyweight, Olympian, Hamza. So you got a bit of a gimme. He's in action. And Catrol against Giasov could be an interesting fight as well. So all of that in a couple of days in a special bonus pod. So look to your inbox, check your emails, and that'll be coming your way as well. Your weekend fight action previewed, and all of that coming to you in association with the lovely Apple Plus subscribers and the patrons as well. Thanks to you, and as well thanks to NAS Medical, who are the leading independent experts in ringside medical care. They provide global medical coverage for professional and amateur boxing events, ringside medicine training, and basic life support accredited courses too. Boxer safety is their priority, and you can find them at nasmedical.co.uk. Thanks to the team and to Apple Plus and Patreon subscribers for bringing you the pod once again this week, as we now count down to this week. And this week, we take you back to 1990s, the 19th of May, 1990, at Caesars Indoor Arena. And that is Pernell against Azumah. First name terms for two of the great names from boxing history. Pernell Whitaker, established lightweight champion. Azumah Nelson, an established super featherweight long-standing champion. Both of them with just the one blemish on their fine careers up to this point. First appearance on HBO as well, Matt, for Pernell Whitaker, the gliding, classy Sweet Pea.
I was trying to think of an equivalent fight that would take place now. But had this type of fight been made now, people on social media, the Twitterati, the boxing Twitterati, would be losing their minds with how excited they were about it. This was a really kind of curious, interesting, exciting phase in boxing history. We just had the 1980s. We just had the Fantastic Four, the rise and fall, actually, of Mike Tyson. But there was kind of lots of people jostling for position as the leader in the sport. Julio Cesar Chavez was one of them. People like Meldrick Taylor. And Pernell Whitaker was another. Azumah Nelson, who I think at this point in time was past his peak, but Azumah Nelson was just in the chasing pack. Most certainly top 10 pound for pound, but probably not battling away for top 3. But Nelson was on a heck of a run. He hadn't lost since he'd lost to Salvador Sanchez when he burst onto the scene as an unknown and gave Salvador Sanchez one of his toughest fights in a fight he was widely expected to lose and lasted into the 15th round. And yeah, he'd put together a heck of a run at featherweight and then super featherweight. And now he was stepping up to lightweight to take on Sweet Pea. Sweet Pea just makes it look all so easy. You could look at Pernell Whitaker and not know a lot about boxing and just presume that it's that easy for everyone and not necessarily recognize everything that he does so perfectly. 3-1 favourite going into this one. And yeah, a real hardcore fans fight. But of course, it was at Caesar's Palace in the small pavilion there, out in Las Vegas. It's got the HBO treatment. It's a lovely little feature on Azumah Nelson before the fight, which is well worth watching. But for me, in this is Whitaker at his best. I'm not saying this is his best performance, but this period, Pernell Whitaker, the lightweight, and I'm going to say it, all I was thinking through this is what would happen to Roberto Duran when Roberto Duran was at his best going up against this Sweet Pea. I think this Sweet Pea would have given that Roberto Duran fits. Such a good fighter, Pernell Whitaker.
Oh, tremendous fighter. Tremendous fighter. And it's not as if he's, at this stage of his career, Matt, it's not as if he's an out-and-out dancer and a mover, is he, Pernell Whitaker? He's become much more accustomed to his professional style. He'll stay in range when he has to, he'll make you miss. It's almost a sixth sense, isn't it? The movement away from or knowing when the punches are coming. Because his hand's relatively low, his feet aren't moving backwards all the time, but it is almost just a sixth sense. It's a unique quality, that to be so close to danger but still to manage to avert it.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, kind of the boxing magazines at the time, the American magazines, they obviously admire him, but at times they're getting frustrated with him. But he wasn't a Sugar Ray Leonard. Although I think Whitaker, the lightweight, could punch far better than advertised, he wasn't Sugar Ray Leonard who could suddenly explode and take an opponent out there. He wasn't what he didn't have the boxer tricks that Roy Jones would exhibit later on in this decade. Now and again, he would do little things. We saw it in the last round when he's hoisting up Azumah Nelson's leg and giving him a little tap on the back of the head. He's a cheeky little chappy for sure, but he didn't have that kind of highlight reel bedazzlement that your likes of Sugar Ray Leonard and your likes of Roy Jones would have. But his awareness inside that ring and his ability to take control of pretty much any moment, I think, is one of the most underrated skills in boxing history. Whitaker, the lightweight, would have taken some serious beating, because the fights at this point, and I think you can include this fight with Azumah Nelson, who, let me just be clear, was a tremendous, brilliant fighter himself. I think Whitaker almost makes the fights as hard as the fights are as hard as Whitaker allows them to be. So Whitaker, for me, is well in control the first half. Nelson has a moment or two in round 7 and 8. Still a heck of an engine, Azumah Nelson, by the way, to keep chasing Whitaker around the ring in the way that he does. But Nelson just has no answer for Pernell Whitaker. Nelson had beaten and knocked out Jim McDonnell in his previous fight. He had dominated at featherweight after Salvador Sanchez tragically died. But here he had no answers for it. But there is, and I was reading a little bit of the Azumah Nelson biography about the story behind this fight and what was going on with Azumah Nelson at home. Now, his beloved wife Beatrice had been diagnosed with cancer a year or so before, and this ties in with Azumah Nelson. He was exceptionally active, fighting 4 or 5 times a year. Then he's dedicated to his wife and he's fighting once, twice a year, because he is essentially looking for a cure for cancer for his wife. And as he goes off into training camp, now Azumah Nelson would always start his training camp in Ghana, he'd finish it in America. And as he went off to America, he realized that his wife Beatrice, only 29 years old, that there wasn't a cure for cancer. She wasn't going to get better. And he was being told that her health was deteriorating day by day. And at the back of his mind, he was concerned that he wouldn't see her again, that by the time the fight occurred, his wife would be dead. Bleak story. And Azumah Nelson said, I thought once I climbed through the ropes, I would be able to forget and focus on the fight, on my job. But I soon found out that I couldn't. That most certainly would play a part. That most certainly would play a part in a fight. And I'm not saying if Azumah Nelson wasn't going through such a horrendous time that the fight would have played out any differently. But you do have to take these things into consideration. After the fight, Nelson tries to get on a flight home, can't go home until the next day, manages to get back, doesn't go home, goes straight to the hospital, spends some time with his wife, and she passed away in the days after that. And Nelson said that, I never really recovered from that. So you take all of that into consideration with Azumah Nelson, and you think, well, okay, maybe some of the mistakes that he was making were down to his mind being elsewhere, because he was making mistakes. He was making uncharacteristic mistakes. But I still think that there are sections in this fight where Whitaker is just cruising along in third gear, just cruising. You still sense that there was more to Whitaker to come in this fight, and that's how good Whitaker was.
Indeed. Indeed. And it was a performance from Azumah Nelson. It was a performance of effort rather than thought, of just sheer grit, determination, rather than maybe guile and technique and tactics, in truth. And he looked a bit one-dimensional on this night, but perhaps part of that was, as Matt said, because of what was going on at home. It was interestingly set up by Larry Merchant on HBO at the very start with Jim Lampley, where he was saying, is Pernell Whitaker prime time? He said, some of my colleagues are shouting about Pernell Whitaker as being one of the would-be greats. He says, for now, I'll whisper his praise. But if he can do a job and do a number on a fighter like Azumah Nelson, then maybe I'll join the choir, is what Larry Merchant says at the very start. There's about an hour and 25, hour and a half HBO broadcast that features that sort of fighter camp footage. There's little sort of previews and biops of both Pernell Whitaker going back to Norfolk, Virginia, of Azumah over in Ghana. So as Matt said, there's some really good footage there. It's worth showing. But in the end, did Pernell produce the kind of performance that Larry Merchant was perhaps hoping for?
No, he didn't. But he, and this was the. It's a bit like Shakur Stevenson today. Like, people are frustrated that it's not breathtaking, it's not exciting. There's times where he appears happy just to go through the motions rather than putting his foot down. But it's that level of control. It's that just in his mind, he's in control of every second. It's almost like he knows what Nelson is going to do before Nelson knows what he's going to do. So it wasn't that bedazzling display that sometimes fighters need to really launch them into the minds of sporting fans. And Whitaker never really did that, I don't think. And of course, you have to remember, this is before he'd fought Julio Cesar Chavez. It's before he'd beaten Buddy McGirt. It's before he'd had that run at welterweight. He'd been robbed against Jose Luis Ramirez in his first title try. He'd won the rematch. He'd beaten the jabbers out of Greg Haugen. So he'd beaten good fighters. But I think this one against Azumah Nelson was the best performance of his career to this point. To beat someone like Azumah Nelson as comfortably as he did, and I thought the cards were too close, to beat him as comfortably as he did, for me, given what we now know what Azumah Nelson went on to do as well. Azumah Nelson, even though I think he was past his peak, he wasn't at the end. I think this is kind of probably exhibit B in the case for Pernell Whitaker being one of the greatest lightweights that the world has ever seen. It was a tremendous performance, but it wasn't a show-stopping exhibition.
But it was class. It was class, probably in the same way that quite a few of Mayweather's performances were class, but not box office. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's fair. And let's not forget, Azumah Nelson would go on and back down to super featherweight, defend the WBC title another half dozen times. Yeah. So, he'd still go on and do good things. He'd still beat Fenech twice. He'd still beat Laporte, Ruelas again. So, yeah, Azumah would still show he'd got the stuff. And Pernell just was terrific on this night. It's a more of a purist performance, in truth. And there are at times where he dips a little too low below the waist, Matt, doesn't he? He pushes the boundaries maybe of defence and what's accepted, I think, for a referee. But otherwise, his judgment of distance, his range, his jab is a thing of absolute beauty. And it's not just a rangefinder. It's a really heavy jab. Watch the way Pernell Whitaker throws his jab. Very accurate, very easily thrown, but he really steps in with it as well, Matt, doesn't he? It's a tremendous jab. And there are times when Azumah Nelson has his moments, and I can see why we got slightly funky cards, even although, like Matt, I don't agree with them. 115, 113, 116, 114, and then 116, 111. He loses a point in the 12th. Pernell Whitaker, but even in a couple of the rounds, I think the 3rd and the 8th are the ones in particular to pay attention to. Those are rounds where Azumah Nelson's having his better rounds. He's putting in a bit of an effort. But in both the third and the eighth, you just watch how Pernell Whitaker just diffuses any momentum by getting behind the jab again in those rounds 3 and 8. And I think he turns them around on the scorecards. But I think they're the kind of rounds that judges might have leaned towards Azumah. And I think they might have slightly made a mistake with that. But the jab is just outstanding.
Oh, it really is. I mean, if you look at the judges' scorecards, they're interesting. None of them gave Azumah Nelson the third. 2 out of the 3 give him the 8th. 2 out of the 3 have given him the 7th before that. Nelson has a really strong finish to the 7th. And he's given
11?
He's given 11 by all 3. He is given round 12 by all 3, 2 of which is 10-8 because of the point deduction. So that the cards start to get closer towards the end of the fight, in the second half of the fight. But yeah, I mean, as I say, this was a very, very good Azumah Nelson. You said he beat Fenech twice. I think the first one was a really contentious draw, wasn't it? And then the second one was one of Nelson's finest performances when he surprised everyone by stopping Jeff Fenech in the 8th round. But Whitaker at this point was without doubt one of the best fighters in the sport. And as you say, just the judgment of distance, the knowing what shot to throw and when, knowing that if I throw this one now, then in 3 punches time, that one's going to land and it's going to do this. And then I move out the way and do this. And I think I love it when Pernell Whitaker gets a little bit mischievous. You say he's going a bit too low and everything else. I mean, there's a sequence when he fought Oscar De La Hoya when Whitaker was past his best, but he gave De La Hoya one of his closest fights. Some people even think Whitaker deserved to beat De La Hoya. But there's a sequence in that when he's zigging and zagging and ducking and diving and he makes De La Hoya look so ordinary in that sequence with the way that he's defending, ducking right down, more or less. Might as well just run off, do a quick gambol on the floor and then get back up again.
It's amazing how often he is there in front of his opponent and then suddenly he's almost tapping them on the back with facing the other way, or facing the same way as his opponent, having completely spun them round. I mean, it's just amazing. And it doesn't look much effort at all. He just glides and moves. I say it's not exaggerated foot movement. It's all very controlled and measured. And ultimately, it's a convincing winner on this night. And he'd go on to beat Jorge Paez, who we touched on last week. We have dealt with those Azumah Nelson fights. Azumah against Jeff Fenech. We have touched on them. He was the American Writers Fighter of the year before in 1989. And he is just tremendous on this night. Really classy. A purest performance from Pernell Whitaker. One of the greats. And unfortunately, Matt, he was knocked over by a car, wasn't he? In, 2019? 8-9 years ago at the age of in his mid-50s?
Yeah. It's gone far too soon. Now and again, you'd see Sweet Pea kind of doing the rounds at the at fight weeks in Las Vegas, and he would appear and he'd be a really popular figure, fairly quiet, fairly humble. Gone too soon, Sweet Pea. But at this point, honestly, I presume people that listen to this podcast know all about Sweet Pea Whitaker, but if you don't, go and indulge yourself with some highlights of his. What a talent he was. I think the best fighter to come out of the 1984 US Olympic team, and it was a really, really strong US Olympic team, but I think Sweet Pea was the best.
Class, absolute class. I like his sort of teal blue red trim kit as well, with the little tassels on the top of his boots, just to exaggerate every little foot movement. So you see him dancing away almost like Santa Claus and his reindeer. Yeah, absolutely tremendous. On this night, by the way, Greg Page shockingly lost in 6 to a 10-9 fighter, Mark Wills. He was supposed to be teed up for a comebacking Mike Tyson, wasn't he? Greg Page. And Tyson in the end would fight Henry Tillman a few weeks later.
I mean, what a knockout from Mark Wills. I remember Mark Wills. I remember this result. Mark Wills was tough. He was one of those that would go the distance with he wouldn't beat the top guys, but he'd go the distance with them. But he wasn't expected to beat Greg Page. And the storyline brewing was that Greg Page had given Mike Tyson hell in sparring, and thus they could sell it. Page passed his best at this point. He was briefly a heavyweight titleist in the 1980s, but what a shot! And you actually get to see that mid rounds of the Whitaker Nelson fight, don't you? A very, very condensed little highlight package, which I quite enjoyed.
And Pernell did go on to have a training career. He did train Zab Judah for a little while. He trained Paul Spadafora, actually, for a few fights. They had a 3-0 stretch together. And I think he trained Calvin Brock as well when Brock fought and lost to Vladimir Klitschko once upon a time as well. That's Sweet Pea, Pernell Whitaker, beating Azumah Nelson on points from 1990. Make sure you tune in for our weekend preview, all the action from the pyramids, including the undercard. Going to talk about that. You'll get that in a day or two's time. So make sure you check your inbox, check where you get your emails or where you get your podcasts from. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. We'll see you again next time.